Hi class, I'm here to go over the discussion questions that refer to Emerson and Thoreau. With these two authors in mind, it's helpful to remember the definition of transcendentalism. In a nutshell, transcendentalism refers to any philosophy that refers to obscure, visionary, or idealistic thought. With Emerson's view of nature, I think three quotes from this text kind of sum it up pretty well. One is the idea that nature exists for us. Nature in its ministry to man is not only the material, but is also the process and the result. All the parts incessantly work into each other's hands for the profit of man. So it seems like there's this kind of relationship where everything we need is out there and it's there for us, as opposed to existing kind of independently of us, and we kind of take from it what we will. Another quote that I think captures his relationship with nature has to do with his respect for it. The stars awaken a certain reverence because, though always present, they are always inaccessible. But all natural objects make a kindred impression when the mind is open to their influence. This idea that there's a certain, reverence out there to be had. And lastly, he also discusses this idea: the sun illuminates only the eye of the man, but shines into the eye and heart of the child. The lover of nature is he whose inward and outward senses are still truly adjusted to each other, who has retained the spirit of infancy even into the era of manhood. This idea, too, that retaining childlike feelings, or being able to feel as a child throughout adulthood, is important. What does he mean by being a transparent eyeball? That's been debated for years. Who knows? He writes that in the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egoism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. It's a very compelling and out there statement. What is a transparent eyeball? It's an eyeball that can be seen through, but also sees. He says he is nothing. And here he's, I think, really getting into a type of almost like meditation, if you will, where he's trying to rid himself of the ego. And again, that's not necessarily a new idea, but perhaps at this time is one that is considered different. And now for the question about the transparent eyeball. What does he mean by this? I'm not sure anyone really knows. He writes that in the woods we return to reason and faith. There I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egoism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. In this quote, he really suggests maybe a type of pantheism, perhaps, that God is everywhere, that perhaps he is godlike. He says that the eyeball is transparent, so not only is it seeing, but it's also being seen through, so that's obscure. This is a quote that's pretty much open to interpretation. Another aspect of it, he writes about egoism vanishing and being nothing. I am nothing. That does come up in transcendental meditation and in lots of different types of meditation, letting go of the ego, letting go of the self, to become united with others and with universal being, and to ultimately let go. Self-reliance, of course, for Emerson is individuality over conformity, being an individual and not a conformist. To go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber as from society. I am not solitary whilst I write this, though nobody is with me. We'll see this idea played out in Thoreau's journal, when he discusses living in the woods. We also have that connection too with the child in Thoreau's work, because Thoreau writes that he was never as wise as he was the day he was born. Another confounding statement, obscure. Why did Thoreau go into the woods? He went into the woods to live deliberately, as he writes. I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out the marrow of life. He wants to truly experience life. Thoreau's time in the woods, this is the chapter we have from Walden, Where I Lived and What I Lived For, is based on his journals. And both of these authors were writing journals, so nonfiction, their thoughts, their philosophy. And he had what he called an experiment. He went to live in the woods for 2 years, roughly 2 years, like 2 years, 2 months and 2 days, something like that, after his brother's death. And his brother died of something that's really preventable and common, and that is tetanus. He cut himself with a razor and got a bacterial infection and died. So Thoreau was, understandably very depressed, and that made him want to go into the woods and experience life in a different way, in a way that was away from society. Thoreau has a lot to say about how life becomes complicated and we as humans don't truly live or experience it. He preaches simplicity. He writes simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. An honest man is hardly need to count more than his 10 fingers, or in extreme cases, he may add his 10 toes to lump the rest. Our life is frittered away by detail. He's saying we have so many things going on that we can't give our full attention to one thing. And isn't that true? Was that true in the 1800s? Well, apparently so. And so he's preaching that doctrine of simplicity. He's saying that we are in such a hurry that we are determined to be starved before we are hungry. Before we get one thing, we want the next thing already. And some of his ideas really, I think, ring true in contemporary culture, and very interesting to look at for that reason. He also writes, I asked that question about his attitude toward modernity and modern convenience and things like that. He criticizes things such as the news. He says, well, watch the news. It's the same every day. I mean, you might get a variation of a town or a person, but you get the same news. The news is useless. He says the post office is useless. I never received any useful mail. For my part, I could easily do without the post office. I think that there are very few important communications made through it. To speak critically, I never received more than 1 or 2 letters in my life. I wrote this some years ago that were worth the postage. He's saying he doesn't even think like mail is worth it, because people, when they communicate, they don't have anything significant to say. And again, I ask you to compare this to contemporary lifestyle. Is this still true today? Or would you debate him? Is this one of his infuriating ideas, or is it inspiring? Does Thoreau's philosophy or Emerson's philosophy seem similar to anything we've read before? Perhaps you see an echo of Bryant's writing, or maybe even Franklin, who preached the doctrine of diligence, thrift, humility, and this sort of spirit of individualism. How are their meditations different from other meditations we've read, Puritans who've reflected on their lives? Well, sin seems to be left out of this, out of Thoreau and Emerson's writings. References to God seem to be more of a universal God, or a universal being. And again, this idea of individuality versus society comes up in their writings quite a bit, and in their lives. Thoreau spent some time in jail for protesting slavery, basically, and a lot of these writers they stood up for what they believed in, and this idea of being a nonconformist is something that I think helps to define the American character. And it is not necessarily a new idea. Of course, it comes up in Melville's writing with both Bartleby and in Moby Dick. And if you look at other writings too, you will see that as well. The individual over the individual and the nonconformist.